Hardware-assisted virtualization is something that allows us to get much better performance in a virtualization setup. In fact, it works so well that almost every single virtualization setup that you'll encounter these days is hardware-assisted. So first of all, let's just remind ourselves of what virtualization is in the first place. Normally, an operating system such as Windows or Mac OS or some kind of Linux distribution runs directly on a physical computer. So you have a physical computer, a piece of hardware, and then you have a piece of software, the operating system, running on that computer. In a virtualization setup, instead of running an operating system directly on a real physical computer, you're running an operating system on top of a piece of software that pretends to be a computer, which is what we call a hypervisor. And this piece of software can then be running on an actual computer. So in that case, you've just put an extra layer in between the computer and the operating system, but it could also be running on top of an already existing operating system. That's perfectly possible as well. Now, there are all sorts of very cool things that you can do with this virtualization. So first of all, it allows you to run multiple operating systems at the same time on one physical machine. I mean, we can have one computer, one physical computer, and we can have a hypervisor installed on it, and then we can run, I don't know, 6 different operating systems at the same time. It does need to be quite a powerful computer, of course, if it needs to do that, but we can run multiple operating systems simultaneously on one physical machine, which can be a huge cost-saving measure. Also, it allows you to migrate operating systems between different physical systems very easily. These instances of these operating systems, these virtual machines essentially, are simply files, and you can move them over from one computer to another with a portable USB drive. If the portable USB drive is big enough, of course. Or you can send it over the network. That's fine as well. So it's very easy to migrate them. It's even possible to migrate operating system instances while they are running. The big disadvantage of virtualization is the performance. You see, if we have an operating system that is just running on a computer, the operating system can talk directly to the hardware. The operating system can send its instructions directly to the CPU. If it wants to access the internet or the local network, it can access the physical network card in that computer directly. In a virtualization setup, it's a bit different. In this situation, the virtual operating system can't talk directly to the computer because it's not running directly on that computer, it's running on the hypervisor. So everything it does needs to go through that hypervisor. Every instruction that it sends to the hypervisor, and then the hypervisor needs to execute that using the real hardware. It takes lots of time, and that's just not very practical. It makes the performance very bad. So hardware-assisted virtualization is a technique that we can use to basically get rid of this problem almost entirely. So how does it work? In a hardware-assisted setup, the CPU of the computer has virtualization capabilities built into it. So the CPU on its own is able to do virtualization. The CPU in such a computer, which is basically any computer nowadays, is able to pretend that it's 2 or 3 or 4 independent separate computer systems to the operating systems running on it. The CPU natively supports virtualization. It doesn't need to rely on the hypervisor to do that for it anymore. And that means we are still going to use a hypervisor, we do still need that, but it can be a way smaller, way less significant, way less elaborate hypervisor. In this situation, the VMs, the virtual machine operating systems, can send their instructions directly to the actual CPU of the computer. So now we've got virtual machines. They're still virtual machines, they're still running on top of a hypervisor, they're still not running on a normal machine, but they can talk directly to the actual hardware, to the actual CPU of the computer, which makes the performance a lot better. In fact, since these operating systems are able to interact so directly with the computer's actual hardware, the performance of these virtual machines is almost, if not as good, as a normal operating system running directly on the hardware. So you can now create very, very high performance virtualization systems with virtual machines that perform like actual computers. So now you might be thinking, okay, great, that sounds lovely. How do I enable hardware virtualization on my computer? How do I use it? Well, first of all, probably it's already turned on. If it's not turned on, you can go into your BIOS settings and there will probably be a setting for it. Intel calls their CPU hardware virtualization VTX, I believe, and AMD calls their thing AMD-V, which is also known as SVM. So you just kind of have to look around in these settings and then you'll eventually find it, and probably you'll find that it's already turned on anyway. You can also see if it's turned on in Task Manager, and when that's enabled, you now have hardware virtualization capabilities. So now when you have a hypervisor, which could be something like VirtualBox for example, then you can use this hardware virtualization to make the performance quite a bit better. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and of course thank you for watching.